Yes. Okay. Now.
All right. Will you raise your right hand and repeat after me? I, Chris Eckford,
I, Chris Eckford,
do affirm under penalties of perjury
do affirm under penalties of perjury
that I will faithfully perform
that I will faithfully perform
those duties assigned to me
those duties assigned to me
as a police officer
as a police officer
for the City of Tacoma Park, Maryland,
for the City of Tacoma Park, Maryland,
that I will uphold the Constitution
that I will uphold the Constitution
of the United States
of the United States
and of the State of Maryland,
and of the State of Maryland,
that I will obey the commands of my superiors
that I will obey the commands of my superiors
and abide by all the rules,
and abide by all the rules,
policies, and procedures
policies, and procedures
of the Police Department,
of the Police Department,
that without prejudice or partiality,
that without prejudice or partiality,
I will perform my duties
I will perform my duties
and enforce all laws
and enforce all laws
within the City of Tacoma Park,
within the City of Tacoma Park,
and as I might otherwise
and as I might otherwise
have jurisdiction,
have jurisdiction,
and that I hereby acknowledge and accept
and that I hereby acknowledge and accept
this appointment
this appointment
as a public trust
as a public trust,
requiring honesty and diligence.
requiring honesty and diligence.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
And now we will sign the oath of office, myself, the chief, and our brand new officer.
Nope.
Three, so all we need is one more person. Now, how many people do you suppose we have wandering around in the old council chambers looking for? But I can't get in. Zero. They might be in the building, but people do you think we have showing up there going, oh, how do we get there? Oops, I guess we're not. calling absent council members. Who do you want us to call? Do we have like a sign up in the other building that say auditorium is out of commission?
Well, I think they know at the front desk, and that's the only place they can get in. Jess, you need, there.
As far as I know, everybody's coming. Oh, here comes Colleen. Here comes Colleen. Okay, there we go. Okay, we need one more. She's it. I'm going to go ahead and start. I'm not going to wait. I think poor Jessie has repeated as many times as she can think of that we're going to be in this building. So good. Colleen, you're our quorum. We're happy to see you. Not that we wouldn't
We would be happy to see you even if you weren't the boss.
Hello. 1 minute.
I do like having a few more windows.
Yeah, it is nice. Knock some holes in the other council chambers.
Yeah. Oh, city manager, could we get a price
Okay.
for knocking holes in the walls of the council chamber? Have windows?
I call this meeting of the Tacoma Park City Council to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Porter,
I'm here.
Councilmember Austin Lane, Councilmember Barry, Councilmember Clay.
Here.
Councilmember Elrich, Councilmember Stevens. Councilmember Williams.
Here.
Well, we have a quorum of the council, so we can proceed. We are being broadcast, not live, but if people see this on a recording, we are coming from Tacoma Park Middle School. We need to move the council meetings for 3 weeks while work is done to finish up the renovation of the old back part of the city building and connect it to the front part. So that's going on in front of the old council chamber, so we need to be here for a few weeks. But we will be back there. I think we have 3 meetings here, and then we'll be back in that room again. So I guess that counts as the first council comment. Are there any additional council comments or announcements? Bruce, and then Colleen?
2 things. One, I wanted to remind my colleagues that this Thursday night is the MML Montgomery chapter meeting at the County Emergency Operations Center, and if anybody wants to carpool up there and go to that, I'd be happy to arrange that. And the second thing is I have a question for the city manager about 2 piles of dirt that have been living on the sidewalk on Carroll Avenue in that newly renovated strip between Columbia and the firehouse. It looked like a contractor dug up to do something, and the dirt piles have been blocking that section of sidewalk for, I believe, at least 3 weeks, and makes for very difficult passage, and I wondered what that is and why it hasn't been finished.
I'm actually not sure about what the nature of that is, Councilmember Williams, but I'd be happy to check with the staff and send an email out to the council tomorrow.
Good, because I'm sure it has to be connected with the work that we did there, and we don't want to be forcing everybody using that sidewalk into Carroll Avenue for any longer. Thanks.
Well, a couple of the other council people and myself attended the Tacoma Park Volunteer Fire Department banquet, which was lots of fun. We met new people from Tacoma Park that I hadn't met before. And I also wanted to remind folks that I will be out next week, or this week from Friday forward to the following Friday, attending the American Planning Association Conference in San Antonio, Texas. And at the end of the conference, I'm going to go over to New Orleans for 2 days to meet with people and kind of survey the scene and meet with some other HUD folks that are down there. And the third thing is that Thursday night this week, I won't be able to attend the MML activity because I'll be at a neighborhood meeting where we're going to be looking at the possible changes to the Elm and Lincoln Avenue intersection area.
Thank you, Mayor Porter. And two things that I wanted to check on. One is the new regulation on invasive plants, and I wondered if it would be possible if we could hold up on implementing that until we've had a chance for the Committee on the Environment to review it. I know they were involved in some of our earlier discussions during our work session on that, but the committee has not had a chance to review the regulation, which just came out this week. And I would also be interested to understand from the city manager what the fiscal impact is going to be, because that was one of the concerns, I think, during the work session, is the amount of time that it's going to take for our arborists to enforce this regulation.
My understanding is that the council can ask for regulations to be held if we wish to do that for council consideration, and I don't see a reason why part of the council's consideration couldn't be asking the Committee on the Environment to take a look at it. And so what I assume we could do is we could, if the majority of the council wishes to basically exercise that right, we could ask that it be referred to the Committee on the Environment and then take it up as a council discussion. I mean, I would be willing to do that. I don't know how the other council members feel. Colleen has a constituent with a particular issue that I think there's an issue with the timeliness of having the new regulations in place.
Yes, that's true. My understanding is we have to have the regulation in place before we can take action. So I guess if that's the case and we can't take action without the regulation, I would rather that we put the regulation forth and then come back and make changes to it afterwards if we have to, so that we have something in place so we can move forward with the issue at hand.
I think we can do that. Can we publish a regulation and then change it? Well, I maybe that's what we should do then, because I would agree with Colleen. I happen to, she and I share a constituent who has an ongoing serious bamboo encroachment issue. And if I'm understanding what Colleen's relayed to me, that we can't begin enforcing this particular regulation until it's published. And he's worried because the later in the spring it goes, the more serious the encroachment becomes. So it's a timeliness issue too. Would that be all right to go ahead and publish it, and then with the understanding that the council will review it, and part of that review will be sending it to the Committee on the Environment?
Sure, I think it makes sense, and I think the physical impact is also important.
Yes.
When we do the review.
Yes.
Yeah, just so long as we kind of make sure that the process by which the Committee on the Environment participates in discussions on environmental issues that the council is dealing with is dealt with in a manner that's satisfactory to the council and the committee and to the city manager. And if that's part of the discussion, I think that'll take care of it. That'd be great.
The other item that I wanted to mention, I also had the opportunity to go to the Volunteer Fire Department Awards, and I had an opportunity at that meeting, or at that dinner, to talk with some of the members of the Lions Club, and was really pleased to hear that they have made an offer to the city to install a marquee at the community center. And I'm interested to find more information about that. I don't know if we've actually received the letter yet. I think they had just put it, had just sent the letter. But anyways, when we do receive that, I'd like to get a copy of that. Thank you.
Okay, my understanding is that things that come to the city on an official basis get distributed to the council as a matter of course, so I assume that we would, but thank you for giving us that heads up.
I kind of thought it was a neat idea that they were suggesting, and so wanted to give them a little airtime, too.
Okay, all right. All right, we're just completing council comments. Do you have a comment?
I don't.
Okay. All right, we will then move on to public comments. This is the time that's set aside for public comments on any items except items that are on our special session agenda. If you have items dealing with the proposed ordinance on the pilot agreement, I would ask if you would hold your comments until we get to that discussion. But for any other comments, this would be the appropriate time. And we don't have the little light on the podium, but I'll go ahead and keep an eye on my watch and let you know.
Okay, my name is Pat Lovelace, 7620 Maple Avenue in Tacoma Park. And it's first time coming into the middle school in many years, and it does bring back memories. I've had real good experiences here, and I'm wondering, I've been thinking about, the kids coming, the school year is coming to an end pretty soon, and we getting the library and the computer learning center set up. Have we thought about having a pamphlet on safe use of computers for the children in our schools? How to teach them to avoid, cyber predators, and how to teach them to use computers to the best of their abilities, and the safety, and to teach the parents how to monitor their kids' use of the computer in the home. And I think since we're starting in the middle school, it might be a really good way to outreach to our kids. Maybe we should invite all the kids to come to council meetings. It'll teach them. And also, what better time to remind people to register to vote? I got a really nice person running for Senate in Maryland here. He's in Tacoma Park, and he wants to serve my city, wants to serve my county, and serve my state. Jamie Raskin needs the people out there to vote, and he needs the people out there to register to vote. So people who are graduating this year, I would like to ask them if they hear me or if they can get the word out, please do your civic duty. Do it for your city, your county, and your state. Register to vote. Do it for me. Do it for yourself. Do it for the pride of your nation. Stand up and show Tacoma Park what you really care. Register to vote. And put your education where your experience is. And show our city council what we really mean by voting. Maybe you will be council members someday. And yes, I would like to see us do what we can to make this city a safer place for our kids. Now that we're in a school, think about what the school needs. Think about our kids. We've got to get the kids away from the drugs, away from the gangs, away from the violence. Each day I still see kids on drugs. Some kid killed in our city, our state, our world. We got one too many, remember. One kid hooked is one kid too many. We got to try to reach out. Now that we're in a school, we got to remember what this school stood for. I went to a school at one time in Saugus, Massachusetts. I am benefiting from my education right now. And I'd like to see our other kids benefit from their education. I think as a city, we can do it. Thank you very much for letting me share.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now I got to sit down.
Is there anyone else who'd like to make a comment?
Hi, my name is Mark Hessel. I've addressed the council before. I'm taking my opportunity to discuss rent stabilization 3 minutes at a time. And I'll take this 3 minutes when I can get it. First, I want to say that one thing that the council did last week I thought was just great, which is most of the council members said what they actually thought about rent stabilization, which I don't think has been articulated very much before. I mean, I know Councilmember Barry came out and made his statement, and I hadn't heard that before. It was very helpful. I'm going to encourage the council, when it does adopt legislation on rent control, rent stabilization, whatever you want to call it, to actually say why it's doing what it's doing. Because I think that's something that's, to a large extent, been missing before in the council's or in the city's ordinance. As I understand it, there's a solid majority on the council for keeping some form of rent control based on a justification that you can help more people if you just do rent control and don't worry about who actually needs the help. Because the cost of raising the money to help the people who need help, or the difficulty of raising enough money to help all the people who need help, is overwhelming. So just do it as an off-budget item, let the landlords pay for it. I think that's the majority of the council's approach. I think it's illegal, and I think the city could very well lose in court on that. But one thing that I didn't hear last week that I think needs to be addressed is the condo issue. I had an opportunity yesterday to drive down 14th Street into the city, into D.C., and turn on U Street. And if you haven't done that in the last 5 years, you really need to go down there. The parking lot I used to be afraid to park in is the biggest Whole Foods I've ever seen. The place has become condo heaven. And I don't think that's what Tacoma Park wants. But strict rent control, and based on what we've seen from staff reports, it's among the strictest, if not the strictest in the country. It's going to drive the rental units out of the city. And as you go through the proposals that staff is putting before you for consideration this evening, and when you meet next week, you really have to look at the bottom line. The bottom line is going to be, if it's reasonable for a landlord to make a reasonable profit renting housing in Tacoma Park, you're going to keep rental units. If you make it too stiff, you're going to lose them all, or close to it. There are always some who will stay. But having a sense of where the council wants to be on this, you really need to pay attention to the bottom line. You don't want to be like the character, I think it was a Jack London story.
I think your time is just about up. Can you wind up?
15 seconds. The old Jack London story where the guy was, I think, carrying gold, and he basically died in the wilderness because he wouldn't let go of the gold because he was too greedy. The city has these affordable units. Don't squeeze it too tight because you could lose them all. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Would anyone else like to make a comment? All right, seeing no one else, we will move on to the city manager's comments.
Just a couple items this evening. In regard to the community center, as the council is aware, there are a number of proposed change orders that will be the subject of mediation between the city and James F. Knott Construction. Our lead attorney on construction matters, Mr. Cox, had a telephone conference with the opposing side last Friday, and I wanted to advise the council that a date for the mediation has been set. It will take place on May 22nd. Mr. Cox, on behalf of the city, will be submitting a short position paper to the mediator, and that deadline is May 18th. A couple other items unrelated to the community center, just general matters that may be of interest to the council. At your places this evening, I did leave a packet of materials related to the proposed budget for FY07. It's attached to a cover memo. Some of the documents that are attached are supplemental pages for inclusion in your budget binder that hopefully will be helpful to the council as you move forward in your budget deliberations. I've also included several other supplemental documents that may be of interest to you. One was an email sent by Suzanne Ludlow last week as a follow-up to a question, I believe it was by Councilmember Elrich, concerning police cars and the tax duplication payment received by the city. There is also a memo from Ms. Ludlow concerning the tax duplication payment for Public Works. The last two meetings I have mentioned, I believe, an article that appeared in the Washington Post recently about recruitment for police officers, and I thought that may be of some interest to the council. And then Councilmember Siemens had also had a question concerning overtime being worked by police officers, and I've included in this packet of information the relevant section of the agreement between Local 400 and the city. As we move forward in the budget process, if there's other items of interest, please let me know. I am aware that there are several pieces of information that various members of the council have asked for that we're still working on, and we will get those to you as soon as possible. But if there are other new issues that arise, if you would please let me know. We want to try to turn it around for you as quickly as possible. As the mayor mentioned, not only tonight's meeting, but the next two meetings will be held in this location. And basically, because of the change in venue, we're not able to telecast these meetings live. For the benefit of the council, I wanted to let you know that this meeting will be replayed on City TV at midnight this evening, as well as on Granicus at midnight. It will take some time for the clerk's office to go back through on the web streaming version, to go back and put the time in it so that you can kind of click to the relevant section of the meeting. That will possibly be later this week. I don't know exactly how long that process takes. So if anyone wants to watch the web streaming version, you basically have to watch the council meeting in its entirety without being able to make those jumps to the relevant item. So that'll just take a little bit longer. And that will be our plan, basically, for the next 2 meetings that also take place in this location. The last item I had, and Councilmember Austin Lane may actually want to cover this. I know that she had met recently with the Recreation Committee to discuss the skate park, and I thought it might be helpful if either Councilmember Austin Lane or I gave an update. Joy, would you like to do that?
I'd be happy to. One thing that the Recreation Committee raised was that I think is an important consideration is whether or not we have sufficient Recreation Department staff to even explore this skate park opportunity. And I would like to see the council very seriously consider in this budget an opportunity to upstaff the Recreation Department. I think we have certainly a need for that with the community center coming online, with all of the new programming that entails. And then the skate park opportunity is one that it seemed to me the Recreation Committee was interested in exploring for the next year, and then in springtime of next year making a decision about where to go with this. Another consideration that factors in is the renovation of the Tacoma Piney Branch Park, and it may be that bringing the renovation and the skate park online all at once makes a lot of sense. So I defer to the judgment of the Rec Department and the Rec Committee, and am encouraged that I heard many people were interested in this opportunity, but do need more time to study it. When I spoke with the Park and Planning chair, it seemed to me that because the capital budget is done on a 2-year cycle, that it does not jeopardize our opportunity to get the capital investment from the county. So if the city council is comfortable with that schedule, then it would be this time next year that we would be considering the skate park proposal.
Thank you. And Ms. Matthews, I appreciate this packet of information that you've provided us tonight. I appreciate your responding to my question regarding overtime. Obviously, we just received this tonight, so I haven't had a chance to look through it, but it appears that it is a copy of the portion of the contractual agreement between the union and the city of Tacoma Park. I'm interested in not just what's permitted under the contract, but also concerned, as I said last week, with the amount of time that officers are working and how many hours they put in a very dangerous job, and whether they are sharp and alert or if they're putting in too many hours. And so the information I'm really looking for is more actual experience over the last period of time. And what I'll do is send a specific email to you with specific requests for information.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Siemens. Are there any other questions from the council?
Any questions from the council? Okay, I don't see any others. Did you have anything else you wanted to brief us on, Barb? Okay. We will move on to the next item on our agenda, which is interviews with Nuclear Free Tacoma Park Committee members. Jim Kuhn? I don't see anybody else here. We may be... Well, I was just going to suggest maybe we should speak with you. The difficulty that we face is that we have to get out of this room on time because we have constraints due to the school system. So we're going to have to go ahead and move through, and if your compatriots join you, then maybe we will sort of up. I believe we. I don't. No, that's not somebody from the Tacoma Park. So we'll just go ahead and you and we can talk, and then if we need to, we will schedule your colleagues for another night. But I know you've been on the committee for a while.
Yes.
And
My third time appearing before you,
yes,
second reappointment.
and wonder if you want to talk a little bit about what the committee is doing and what you would like to see the committee doing, and
Sure.
any thoughts that you have about that.
Yeah. Well, the biggest change in the last couple of years, two things. One is recruiting. We've got some great new members who actually work in the field of anti-nuclear activism and happen to be Tacoma Park members. So recruiting has been important for us. We've been sort of underrepresented for some time. The other thing, of course, is the transportation amendment, expanding the sort of jurisdiction of the committee to include issues related to the transportation of nuclear waste. And I hope you all had a chance to read the column in The Voice this past month by one of our members.
I think that actually we had discussed that with our attorney. Didn't we have some language on that?
Yeah. There was a time, maybe it was a year ago, a year and a half ago, when we came before you with a lot of material.
Right.
Talked about it,
Right.
particularly as it related to the city of D.C.'s efforts to ban transportation of hazardous wastes. So this is a concern given the proximity of the CSX line.
Yes, yeah.
And, I mean, you've heard a lot about it, so I think we're all very pleased that this this change has been made.
Yes.
It's very relevant, and it's going to get only more relevant as things move forward, either towards opening Yucca Mountain or opening the parking lot that on the Indian reservation nearby that they're hoping to store waste on.
We shocked people by being on time tonight, so I know no one expected us to be on time on our schedule. So.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Robert Rini.
Yes. And we were just talking about what the committee's been doing and the kinds of things the committee would like to be doing in the future and that sort of thing. So I don't want to interrupt you.
Not at all. I was just giving a recap of the sort of things that have gone on in the past year with regards to the transportation issue
Excellent.
and recruiting. The fact that we've gotten some excellent new members on the committee recently. The other thing that I think is worth mentioning is the Post on Saturday had an article about the federal Defense Department expecting to begin testing of a new generation of nuclear weapons. The ordinance was begun with nuclear weaponry and not spending city funds on companies that profit from nuclear weaponry. So, for a time after the Cold War, people started to forget a little bit about nuclear weapons. They haven't gone away. It's very important that we keep this on the issue and keep opposing the use of Tacoma Park taxpayer residents and residents' funds on any companies that benefit from nuclear weaponry. So that's going to continue to be an issue, and we hope to. One of the things we've talked about recently was holding an event on the anniversary of the Trinity test, which was the first test of a nuclear weapon on July 15th or 16th. That's a Saturday and a Sunday. So we're going to be talking about possibly holding a few more public events in conjunction with important events on the calendar of nuclear abolition. So we hope.
Public education type things, yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, that's very helpful. Anything else you'd like to add?
Yes, I would, in fact. Thank you, Jim, for filling us in so capably. I think our focus has historically, in the last few years, been on transportation, but we're actually committed to also raising consumer awareness about nuclear weaponry and those issues, and I think Jim has certainly echoed that tonight. We are very excited about the invitation to Dr. Helen Caldicott to come and speak to us in September. We're trying to confirm a date, and we'd like to raise awareness around that event, which we believe would be of wide community interest. So we're looking forward to that. We'll obviously continue to monitor the transportation issue as it's relevant to the nuclear waste transportation issue. It's always been our view that if you hate chemicals on the railroads, then you're really going to hate nuclear waste on the railroads. So we'll continue to educate ourselves and the community about what's happening along those lines. Those are pretty much the functions we're undertaking, other than our core function of reviewing waivers and other requests that come before us. We look forward to continuing to work with the council and the city in these important matters.
Have you done anything with waivers other than the recent discussion about Sony?
No, that's the only one that actually has come before us for a couple of years now. So we determined, as you well know, that Sony shouldn't have been on the list effective 2003. Our list was only current as of 2002, and we appreciate the action the council has taken to address that matter.
Terry?
Thank you for coming here tonight. I really appreciate hearing the broadening of the work that you're doing with the committee. I've been concerned over the past few years that the core maintenance of the list and handling of waivers had maybe been less of a benefit to the community than the work that you're doing now. And I really appreciate your going out and not just addressing a serious local issue with the transportation, but also looking at how you can move Tacoma Park into a kind of a leadership role for advocacy within this field. And I think there's a lot going on. I think we've discussed the fact that nuclear weapons are actually, I guess, in use in Iraq with low-level radiation. So I'm not sure that the community at large really is aware of that and aware of the impact of those types of things. And so I hope to see more of the work and the direction that you're taking in trying to educate the community and to be leaders for building the momentum that's required to get these things under control. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah. Just one statement. This is timely because of the move of, you'll have to remind me of the name of it, the organization that Linda Gunter works for.
Nuclear Information and Research Service.
Right.
NIRS.
So they're moving to our town fairly soon.
Actually, I think
kickoff.
They'll have a kickoff event, but I think they physically made the move. So
right.
Sort of a soft launch and now the public launch to follow. And we're very pleased to have them, not only as neighbors, but also part of our community in such an important way.
Right.
Thank you for
I
recognizing
think that's
that.
a terrific opportunity for us to re-examine our nuclear policy and talk about how we can make sure that we're updating all along the way. And I appreciate your initiative to make sure that we had added the transportation of waste to your mission. That's important in my view, and we've worked closely together on the hazardous materials waste transport by rail. So yes, I'm glad to see you here and appreciate the updates you've given us.
Thank you especially for your support. And like you, I think we're enthusiastic about NIRS's move to Tacoma Park and hope that it signals moves by other groups who also are community-oriented to Tacoma Park. It's a great place to not only live, but also to work.
And welcome also to Jay Levy. We're trying to shock everyone tonight by actually being on schedule. So we've just thrown everybody off thrown them out for a loop today. But is there, not having heard anything your colleagues have said, is there anything you would like to add?
Just say you agree, Jay. Oh, okay. Well, I think
Another thing that we've done, from where I can just heard, is help spread the word about Tacoma Park's successful nuclear-free zone. Last summer, I guess I reported this, but maybe some of the newer council members don't know what went on. I represented Tacoma Park at the World Conference of Mayors for Peace at the UN. The UN was having its annual, not annual, it's every 5-year nuclear proliferation review, and the World Conference of Mayors met in New York at the same time to urge nuclear non-proliferation, and I spoke at the Mayor's Conference representing Tacoma Park, spread the word about what we were doing, how we were going about it. Next month, June, I'll be in Vancouver at the World Peace Forum on a panel which is dedicated to nuclear-free zones, and I plan to distribute our ordinance and perhaps help other communities do what we've done, and continue to keep Tacoma Park in the forefront. So, and I do these at my own expense. Although the city has agreed to pay the registration fee for the World Peace Forum, which will bring together about 3,000 delegates from around the world in Vancouver, British Columbia.
And I appreciate your representing the city and representing me at the Mayor's Forum. And you're a much more capable representative than I would be.
You're very modest, Mr. Mayor.
Is there any other questions? I think several members of the council have had various questions about what the committee has been doing, but I think we're pretty much up to date now, unless there's something else somebody would like to raise. Okay, well, I just want to thank you all for your many years of service, and in return, you're probably going to get stuck with more years of service. But we very much appreciate the things that the committee has done, and certainly it's, I think, raised the profile of the issue quite a lot. And I hope that what the city has done has been helpful in sort of making this a more feasible issue for other people to take on.
Well, we appreciate the leadership that this city has actually played in the nuclear-free zone movement and continues to play. And we look forward to continuing our role as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you all very much. We appreciate it. All right, the next item on our agenda is we have one item on a special session. Sarah, do you want to, we've discussed this more than once in work session, which is the pilot ordinance with Montgomery Housing Partnership. And are we still working with the same group of buildings?
As far as we know, right now, for those of you who have been following this or have had conversations with Montgomery Housing Partnership, they are looking at the possibility of adding another property to the mix. But at this point in time, we have not received official notification that that's one of the options. So the next time we come back to you, the addresses may change a little bit. Hopefully they won't go down.
Okay.
Basically, what you have before you is an ordinance and a proposed pilot agreement which would authorize the abatement of property taxes at properties on Erie Avenue, Flower Avenue, and University Boulevard for a 10-year period. The abatement would be graduated over that 10 years, where it would be 100% for the first 5 years, 75% for the following 3 years, and then 50% for the final 2 years of the agreement. One of the conditions of the agreement would be that the MHP would own the property during that time period, but also lease roughly half of it, lease not less than 50% of the units to individuals that are low and moderate income based on the county's HUD information.
Okay. This ordinance, it would be a 2-reading ordinance. This is the first reading. It's in front of the council. Does someone want to move it?
Move. Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Does any council comments on this ordinance? We've had a number of discussions, but I think it's worth noting, because this issue has come up on more than one occasion, about whether the city is willing to put some of its own money into preserving affordable housing. And I would point out that with the pilot, we are in fact putting city funds into affordable housing. We are foregoing tax revenues that we would otherwise get in order to enable a nonprofit to purchase this housing and to maintain it as affordable. So we are, in fact, putting city funds into this effort, and we have had very good luck luck with the nonprofits that we have worked with in the past. They have done a very good job of maintaining decent housing and maintaining it at an affordable rate. So I'm very pleased that we're able to work this out with Montgomery Housing Partnership to preserve 3 additional buildings of affordable units for the people in our community.
This is a point of information. What happened to the New Hampshire Towers location?
Montgomery Housing Partnership was not part of that agreement. CPDC, Community Preservation Development Corporation, is still continuing to work with the Tenants Association to replace some financing that they had secured initially for the project. So it's still in progress. We haven't heard anything definite one way or another.
Is it looking somewhat promising or not?
Depends on the time of day and the day of the week.
How about
they're
now?
still working very hard to do that. The Tenants Association is still very eager to be able to provide home ownership opportunities as well as affordable rental opportunities to their organization members.
Any other council comments?
I just want to thank MHP for hanging in there, both on this, but also on 641 Houston, which is the property that's missing from this list, but which we are still negotiating, I gather, as of last week. This thing is still in play, and it hasn't exactly dropped off the earth yet, so I'm really glad that MHP stuck with it and tried to come up with some resolution.
Right. Like you, we are also crossing our fingers and hoping that they'll be able to pull that into the mix. If they do that, there'll be another 28 units.
Any other council comments? Any public comments on this ordinance first reading?
Yes, my name's Pat Lovelace, 7620 Maple Avenue, Tacoma Park. I'm really glad to see the city putting the money where their mouth is, to continue allowing the low income to have affordable housing. But I want people to know the times are not getting any easier for the low income. There's the price of food, the price of housing, the price of heat, the price of clothing, everything is skyrocketing on it. Gasoline is now approaching $3 a gallon again. And literally, money's being pumped out of our pockets a lot quicker than it is going in. And I only get just a hair over $600 a month on my income. Totally disabled, blind, and amputee. And I'd like to commend the City Council on the work that Tacoma Park is doing to keep housing affordable for me. Because I have heard from other people in other states, like some places in Massachusetts, there is no affordable housing. You're out in the street. Bye-bye. Don't care whether you can see or you can't see. You're out. You know, some other places are the same way. And so far, Tacoma Park has been doing everything they can. I'd like to see Tacoma Park continue, maybe set up a fund for low income, because times are going to get harder and harder. And I'd really glad to see this ordinance going through, and I'd like to see it pass. And I'd like to see everybody remember us people on low income are not getting it any easier. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments on this ordinance? All right, seeing none, are there any additional council comments? All right, the ordinance is before the council at first reading. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ordinance passes at first reading.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is a report from the Emergency Preparedness Committee. When we formed the committee, we asked for them to come back and report to us. And I see that we have at our places here a written report. Yeah, go ahead and have a seat. Is there somebody you wanted to have join you?
Okay, there are 2 colleagues, but I think I'm okay.
Okay, go ahead.
All right.
That's fine. That you can do it by yourself or do it with other people if you want.
So I'm Stacy Baker, and I am the community co-chair of the Emergency Preparedness Committee. One of the ways that we elected to operate is to have a co-chair from the community as well as a co-chair from staff. So Wayne Hobbs, on behalf of the city staff, is the co-chair. The committee has been extremely collaborative, and I'd like to report to you what our findings are for the first 6 months, what we've been doing. I have a written document that I've submitted to you. This is the first time that it's being distributed, so I apologize for you're not having this in advance. This is a document that summarizes our review of the Emergency Operations Plan. That was one of the items that was in the charge for the committee that we've been doing in the last 6 months. Give you an opportunity to answer, to ask any questions that you have, and also hear what your priorities or concerns might be for us for our next 6-month report. What we have been doing in our first 6 months, we have reviewed the plan. That is our primary deliverable that we've done, is to review the city's emergency operations plan, including its 26 appendices, also to look at department plans for public works and for the recreation department. I'll spend most of my time telling you the results of that. We have also proposed some modifications to the scope of our committee, which will be coming to you in the future for your consideration in revising our charge. We have helped to promote Community Emergency Response Team, or CERT, volunteer training within the city of Tacoma Park, and we are now working on our deliverables for the next 6 months, and of course would like your input on that. When we reviewed the operations plan, we asked ourselves 3 questions. We asked, is the plan adequate and appropriate for Tacoma Park, considering the many changes that have been made since the plan was developed? September 11th has happened. Citizens' expectations, your expectations of preparedness have changed. There's been a national incident management system that has been put in place that governs how jurisdictions work with one another and how emergency operations are carried out. So we're looking, is this adequate and is appropriate given county roles versus city roles, given the scenarios that are most likely to affect the city, which include severe weather, number one, could be hurricane, could include snow, also pandemic flu. That's a new concern. Every business in this country right now is asked to consider, how will you operate if you have 30 to 50% of your workforce that may not come to work? And so the city also has that as a context for, is our plan adequate and appropriate? Pandemic flu, as I mentioned, release of hazardous materials is another thing that's very likely to affect us. So we had that in mind. We also had in mind, is it adequate and appropriate related to the attention to special populations? Those may include, but are certainly not limited to, people who are in the care of the hospital, people who are in assisted living, people who are low income, people who are Spanish speaking, people who don't have access to the many devices that could receive the Alert Tacoma messages, for example, people in high density buildings. And lastly, is the plan adequate and appropriate relative to city resources and the staff capacity? So that was our first question, is it adequate and appropriate? Second question, is it accurate and up to date? And third, is the plan being followed? We find that in general the city has a minimally adequate all hazards emergency plan. However, there are many opportunities for that plan to be improved and for the city's overall preparedness to be improved. What we find is that what we need in Tacoma Park is an alignment. We need an alignment of what the plan says and what the actual roles of the city would be relative to the county. In almost all circumstances, the county, in any large-scale emergency for certain, is going to be in charge, not Tacoma Park. Our most likely emergencies where Tacoma Park would be in charge might be related to severe weather, trees blocking the road, things like that. So there needs to be an alignment with the county roles. There also needs to be an alignment between what the expectations are from you and the city and what the staff can actually deliver. I'd like to give you just a couple examples, and these relate to volunteer coordination and communications and preparedness education. The current plan states that the Recreation Department in particular will have a role related to volunteer coordination. Right now, Montgomery County has a very robust volunteer coordination program. They manage the training for the search program that I mentioned earlier. They have a volunteer center. We recommend that Tacoma Park should rely exclusively on Montgomery County for the coordination of emergency response volunteers. There may be other volunteer roles that Tacoma Park citizens could play. For example, communications, relaying messages door to door in an emergency. But that's a much more limited role. So that's an example of where there is not an alignment between what our plan says we should do and what the actual resources are that Tacoma Park should avail itself of. Similarly, with communications and emergency preparedness education, there are many county resources that we could take advantage of. And we recommend that externally produced resources be used, that we could promote those. That's an opportunity for the city to promote the types of resources, seminars that are available for businesses, for community groups, but not something to duplicate. However, our plan says that the Tacoma Park public information folks will be disseminating information to residents about preparedness through the newsletter, on cable TV, through lots of venues. Yet we've not found that anyone has been assigned to do that on a regular basis. So this is an example of something that would come back to you, is this is a policy decision and a resource decision. If we're going to say that we're going to take the opportunity to promote preparedness information to the residents, then something's going to have to give with staff. The committee finds that it's not adequate to expect that these things will be done on top of other full-time duties. And so either resources should be found to identify a half-time FTE, or responsibilities need to be shifted so someone can focus on this and have follow-through, or we should say that we're not doing that in Tacoma Park. So those are just a couple examples where an alignment needs to be created between what we say we're going to do, what's available in the county, what staff actually do, and the result that the citizens get. We've identified a number of areas there's a two-page summary that's in a light yellow. And going from the bottom of page 1 to the top half of page 2, we've identified a number of appropriate areas where Tacoma Park would not be stepping on toes, and that would be really good and valuable for us to invest more time, energy, and attention on preparedness. Some of these include promotion of volunteer opportunities. Certainly, the more people that are trained as CERT volunteers, for example, within the boundaries of Tacoma Park, the faster they may be to be on scene, even if they're requested appropriately through Montgomery County under their control. So we could promote those types of opportunities for volunteer, for education and training, disseminating the externally produced resources, other things that get to be more complicated, developing, maintaining, and testing some non-electronic communication systems. We're going to reach a fraction of our residents through Alert Tacoma. And what about everybody else? What about English-speaking, Spanish-speaking, other-speaking residents? How is that going to play out? This is an opportunity for Tacoma Park to be more prepared, but that would require some dedicated time to focus on that. Ensuring that local emergency contacts are cultivated, kept up to date, whether that's in a high-rise building or with the hospital, and working in close coordination with them and sharing the information that's appropriate with Montgomery County on special needs populations. That's an opportunity. Doing more exercises. We appropriately, the staff participate in regional preparedness exercises. That should continue. However, if we have in our plan how Tacoma Park will take command of a smaller scale emergency when a memorandum of understanding doesn't need to be invoked, we don't need to get the county in, well then there should be an exercise that tests how that works. There should be an exercise that tests how we would then, Tacoma Park, request the volunteers, for example, through the county. So that's not an area that is currently being done, and it would be an opportunity for the city to be more prepared. Additional coordination with Montgomery County to make sure that objectives important to Tacoma Park and cross-jurisdictional issues are incorporated into those exercises. That's something where the Emergency Preparedness Committee could have some advice on that would be an opportunity. And additionally, more training for staff. The National Incident Management System is something that our Deputy City Manager is not trained on. Other staff may also need to be trained on this. It's essential to be able to effectively function with other jurisdictions that staff have this training. It's essential to be able to update our plan to reflect the National Incident Management System and be able to set up operations in the event of, even a small-scale emergency. We need to fit in with the way that other jurisdictions operate. Also, if we have a NIMS, as it's called, is the acronym, if we have a NIMS-conforming plan, if our staff are prepared, we'll be eligible for potentially other outside funding and grants, which we would not be if we have a more outdated plan. However, sending staff to training, putting their attention on any of these issues requires resources and time. The staff have seen a draft through Wayne Hobbs, a draft of the report that we've shared with you, and their response was generally agreement on everything that's in there. We found the staff to be extremely collaborative with the resident members. The county's participation has been outstanding, and the county has really helped the entire committee and the staff be clear or clearer about the various roles and the opportunities that a city like Tacoma Park within a county that is, very well prepared could have to better serve its residents. So in conclusion, we put back to you that we'd like you to be clearer about what the priorities are for being more prepared, making sure that the resources align, and then we'd be delighted as the Emergency Preparedness Committee to then work with the staff or to answer additional questions from council about some of these areas.
Mark and Terry.
A couple questions. One is, how do you find the county in terms of trying to coordinate and develop things right now? I mean, when we talk about alignment makes a lot of sense to me because they're going to be deploying a lot more people, a lot more material than we'll deploy. How did you get into discussions with the county about alignment? Is it clear where we need to, where our boundaries should stop in terms of responsibilities and there should begin?
I think that's an excellent question. And on behalf of the committee, I think that the county has been very clear with us about the scope of the type of emergencies for which they would take command. And that the willingness to share resources and to make sure, they've been very forthcoming about, please, Tacoma Park, max out all of our education resources, volunteer resources. They want our residents to avail themselves of those resources. I think that there could be some additional opportunities for Tacoma Park to advocate for, hey, when is that next mailing going to occur for the home emergency checklist to go to all of the residents? So we could be an advocate, and we also need to exercise, do a drill, a tabletop, to make sure that all of that coordination that they're so glad to offer us will, in fact, play out well in an emergency.
But I guess that's one of my concerns is where the county will, if, for example, in your discussions, did the county say this is what we're going to do and this is what we expect the city to do, and is what they expect the city to do things that they, for example, do in other parts of the county? In other words, if they looked at the city and said, you're going to do X, Y, and Z, whereas if it happened on the other side of the street in Silver Spring is the assumption that the county is going to do everything. I mean, did they come to you and say, this is your job, this is going to be our job?
I think that it is clear based on the nature of the emergency. So, for example, anything that's a fire in Tacoma Park, the county is already involved by nature of fire and rescue. Anything that's large scale, even though Tacoma Park is its own governmental unit, the county is going to be the lead here. So I think that there is much more clarity now than when the plan was written, and that it would not be difficult, although it may be time-consuming, to update Tacoma Park's plans to fit in with that delineation of likely roles.
My last question has to do with the Red Cross, because the Red Cross is referenced in here. But there's talk about the Red Cross changing its role. Some discussion about them becoming a conduit and not the end service provider, I guess, for instance, use of institutional terms. And did you all discuss the possibility of the Red Cross changing its role and the implications for the city? And what do do our discussions, have they included so far discussion with the Red Cross? And do we know what they would do when they come into play?
Our committee has not met since some of the information has circulated about the American Red Cross changing its role and outsourcing, some of its activities. We would want to follow Montgomery County's lead, in my opinion, on that regard. County works closely with the Red Cross for sheltering, like, for example, warming centers when there were storms this winter. We'd like to work with the American Red Cross to make sure that there is at least one location within Tacoma Park, which there is not now, that is a designated shelter that could meet their standards. That's one way that we'd like to work with them. I don't have anything else to offer on behalf of the committee about, other issues with American Red Cross and how they do training and certifying shelters, things like that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming tonight. It's impressive the amount of ground that you've covered in your short existence here on the Emergency Preparedness Committee. Since the new charge, if you will, to the committee, you've covered a lot of ground. You had a lot to report tonight. I appreciate that. I wonder, and maybe this question's better directed to the city manager, I wonder if any of the resource needs that you've talked about have been addressed in this year's proposed budget.
I think in part, as I had mentioned last week, we did include $20,000 in my proposed budget for the council's consideration to buy emergency preparedness supplies. I believe that was an issue that had been raised by the committee in the event of some type of natural disaster or other type of emergency situation where we'd have staff that would essentially need to be housed at the city and not be able to go home. And I believe Ms. Baker can correct me if I'm wrong, that was a specific suggestion made by the committee or a concern.
For
that had been
staff
expressed.
as well as patrons that may be in the community center for other programs who need to shelter in place. It's important as, stewards of those citizens and staff that are in the building that there are enough blankets, cots, food, water at a minimum. That's not for the rest of the city. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. You've listed a number of items here that are resource needs, really, that you're asking the council to try to prioritize and give some detail and direction. I appreciate that, but and I haven't had a chance, obviously, to read your report yet. I just haven't received it tonight, but I wonder if there's enough information here for me to know what the resource requirements really are going to be for some of these, or if you have a plan to develop a more detailed resource list.
Our committee has not done any analysis of what resource needs would be for each of these bullet points. So we elected to simply present a list as a first step and suggest that a half-time full-time equivalent might be a good place to start in assigning someone's time through a shift or through a new staff hire to begin addressing some of these. But no, we have not done a resource analysis.
That's fine. That answers my question. And I'm not sure how does the committee stand now on membership? Are you fully enrolled now with volunteers?
I believe we enjoyed that for a very short period of time, and now, as you know, you have two people from your ward who are stepping down, and so we will have some vacancies to fill.
Well, also at the volunteer award dinner that we went to this week, a new resident of Tacoma Park has stepped forward and said that they may be interested in joining the committee. Would I direct them to you or someone else?
Actually, I think they go to the city clerk. You're a council-sponsored committee, so they go to the clerk to be up before the council for an interview.
Right. What I think they're looking for first, though, is a chance to talk with committee members to find out a little more about the committee before they actually make that big plunge and volunteer for it.
Sure, I'd be happy to speak to anyone considering being a part of the committee.
And then one last question, that is, again, looking at the resource needs, you mentioned the hospital and other businesses. Do you have any kind of a plan at this point for seeking greater involvement from any of the businesses in the city?
We do not. We would like to help the city in promoting opportunities for businesses and community groups to avail themselves of Montgomery County educational seminars and materials. There are already tremendous business preparedness kits that could be disseminated, but the issue is who will coordinate the outreach. The Emergency Preparedness Committee could assist in that regard, but we have not seen our role as being a team, a speakers bureau, or a team of individuals who would then go out to these community groups.
And that probably brings us full
If
circle
that's
back
what your
to
question is.
Councilmember Edwards. Thank you.
Joy and then Bruce.
Stacy, thank you so much for your presentation. You have definitely brought your expertise to bear on this subject, and I really appreciate it. I know my council colleagues do as well. One thing that I wonder about with the county's involvement is are they developing networks of residents that they can call on at times of crisis?
Yes.
Okay, and are they doing that in Tacoma Park?
The program that I mentioned, the Community Emergency Response Team, that is the network within Montgomery County and many other parts of the nation where volunteers have a minimal amount of training to know a little bit about responding to a lot of types of emergencies to be able to assist the professionals. The CERT volunteers were called up to assist in Montgomery County with flu clinics when vaccine was scarce. They were called up to assist with the warming shelters this winter. They've not been called out a lot, but they stand prepared to do that. Tacoma Park residents, if they participate in that network, they could be called up for a Tacoma Park emergency or be deployed to any other place within the county. So that is the network that would serve us best.
Okay. And do you feel that there are things the city needs to do or the county needs to do to expand that network in Tacoma Park?
Promoting opportunities to become involved in the network. We'd love to at least double the training that we have with 4 residents that have been trained to make sure that more are there. That's certainly one thing that we can do. The second area is cultivating and expanding a list of volunteers, such as the public safety contacts and others who may be able to play a communications volunteer role in the event of a local emergency. That was suggested by council as something that we explore, and we found that although the Public Safety Citizens Advisory Committee has been lately trying to resurrect their network of public safety contacts to get them to take on willing role to do this communications function, we certainly don't have in our city a coverage that would make this a viable option today if there were a need for such volunteers. And so what we'd like to do is look at it again. We have a liaison on our committee to the Public Safety Citizens Advisory Committee. We'd like to look at this again in 6 months and see, what is this volunteer network? Can we rely on it? If it's mentioned in the plan, it should be functional. And we should be sure that it works. So I'd like to come back to you in 6 months and report again on what we may have in Tacoma Park that's good to augment other volunteer networks coordinated by the county.
That sounds terrific. One of my thoughts as you were doing your presentation was just a timeline. If you could propose maybe at the next time you come back to us a sort of timeline or a framework that would help us get up to speed within a certain period of time, the resources, the staff training, whatever needs to be done, and a time frame by which it seems reasonable to expect that would be very helpful. The last thing, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to thank you for that direction on how we can be clearer. At our next meeting, the staff will be coming back to the committee to make suggestions about, a timeline and some of the areas where they can now make modifications to the plan. And I think if we look at this as one of our deliverables for you is to be more clear about a timeline and recommendations. We'll do that in the future.
Okay, and then the last thing is about the expectation the council has for this to be carried out at the staff level. I would expect that a certain amount of collaboration among all the departments would be essential. So hopefully we will either have an internal committee or a designee from each department, someone who can go through this training and bring that information back to their colleagues. The halftime person might be the one who coordinated this. I'm not sure I completely understand the position description for that person, but would like to know more about that. And what I can say is this is a very important issue, and our residents would be well served by us taking this very seriously and making sure that we are as prepared as we can be, that we are tapping the county resources that already exist to make sure that our community is even better prepared than we are today. So I look forward to this ongoing dialogue. I think it's really important for us to get updates and to hear what the questions are that you need clarification on. So thank you again for your presentation.
Bruce?
Yeah, and I want to thank you and the committee for your presentation and for what looks to be a lot of hard work that you've put into this so far. And what I want to get a little bit better sense of is where you are in being able to maybe help us with an understanding of some priorities for resource allocation that we might be able to consider in the upcoming budget discussions that we're going to be having over the next month or so. And I'm not sure, maybe the city manager can answer the first part of my question. With the inclusion of your budget for the $20,000 for the supplies, was that something that kind of came up independent of the committee as a result of some of the committee discussions? And I'm wondering, given that, where another area might be. It sounded like you hadn't, as the committee, necessarily come up with any kind of prioritization of things, and not having had a chance to look at the whole report, I'm not sure whether it would be clear from the report whether there was a couple things that we could look at considering in the current budget discussions, or whether that's premature.
I think in terms of the supplies, I know it was an issue that Mr. Hobbs had discussed with me, and I think it also came up at the committee, so I think it was sort of a not even a coming together, but I think everyone sort of had the same thought early on to that was identified. I think by the time the committee was finalizing its recommendations, quite frankly, most of the numbers in our budget had to stop moving, so we could go ahead and get the binders out to you last week. I think one specific issue and recommendation the committee has made was perhaps a part-time position or someone to coordinate that. And I don't like some specific staff training, which there are some funds in the budget for just generally in terms of training. Is there anything else, Ms. Baker, that I overlooked in terms of specific recommendations?
No, I think the only disagreement between what was in the proposed budget and what the committee talked about was the half FTE or shifting of someone's responsibilities to focus on this. We have not done any prioritizing. A next step could be if you'd like to charge us with working with some of you or separately trying to produce a more prioritized list of what we would see as the highest priorities. We'd be happy to accept your assignment.
Because I guess what I was thinking about was, we haven't even started talking about the budget yet, but my sense going in is that it may be hard to add FTEs of whatever description because they have an ongoing impact on the budget. But if there were some smaller pieces that were more of a one-time nature, and I won't characterize whether they're 20,000 for supplies as small or not, but that type of thing, there might be an opportunity to kind of shoehorn some of those into this budget in the upcoming discussions, and having a sense of what some of those items might be for consideration, even if it was just, well, here's 5 of them that fit into that category. Depending on the priorities of the council, there might be something that would be appropriate.
We're running about 10 minutes past our allotted time, so I'm going to be very brief with my question or my comment. It seems like you've touched on some things that we deal with a lot with the county, like city resources versus county resources, and many of them are very difficult issues, and you've talked about resources within the city. I guess what I'm sort of wrestling with is I've been listening to your presentation, which was an excellent presentation, by the way, and then the questions that my colleagues have asked is sort of what our follow-up should be, particularly as Bruce mentioned, as we're going into the budget right now, a fairly constrained budget. It occurs to me that I guess I would turn this a little bit back to you. You said the staff's going to have a response to you. What would be the most helpful thing that we can do to keep this process moving forward? Would it be to have a discussion presentation by the staff with you there talking about some of these issues? Would it be to let you and the staff sit down and work out some of these issues to get to the next step, and then the council make another presentation to the council? What do you think would be most helpful in helping you sort of work through to the next step?
I think it would be helpful to be able to come back to you when we have had an opportunity to work with the staff about some things that they can do and what they can't do. I think it's very important for you to communicate what your expectations are to the staff, however. I mean, there are lots of priorities. Everything seems a priority. And so I'm concerned, speaking as an individual member of the committee, that even if staff say, yes, we agree with you on these changes, that there may not be time to make all of those changes to the current emergency operations plan unless something else is put aside. And so in that regard, it seems very important that early on the council communicate what its priorities are so that it will enable the dialogue that we will have, and then I'd like to come back and report to you, that will enable that to be successful and productive.
Okay. I'm trying to think what would be a good mechanism. I mean, many of us haven't actually had a chance to look at your report yet. And so maybe we could do that as we go through the budget discussion. Maybe I'm looking at the city manager, maybe a piece of the budget discussion can be on emergency preparedness. Is that feasible?
Yeah, I think that's very feasible. I would add that I have a management team meeting later this week, and one of the things that we will be discussing is the committee's report. And my hope is that we can do exactly what Ms. Baker has requested, sort of quickly identify what can be done. If there's any constraints to any of the committee's recommendation, then I imagine that Mr. Hobbs and Chief Kramer, who are the staff representatives to the committee, will be sharing that information. I don't know, when is your next committee meeting? It's at the end of
this month.
End of this month. So I think that would provide a very good opportunity in a fairly short time frame for us to turn around the staff comments and for the committee to kind of take it from there and move forward.
And if there is a member of the council, I look at Bruce because you were the one that made the suggestion, who wanted to talk to the committee about things and try and help us make some recommendations for priorities. I don't see that there would be any problem with that.
If I can just make one more comment just as we wrap up. Unfortunately, Mr. Hobbs was not able to be here this evening. He was feeling ill earlier today and went home. So I indicated I would convey on his behalf the staff's appreciation to the committee and his, I guess, personal appreciation to the members of the committee for all their hard work. I would echo Ms. Baker's comment that I think staff has found it a very collaborative process and very helpful to have their input in the city's emergency management planning.
I would reiterate, whoever made the comment, that it's clear you all have done a lot of work with this, and I really look forward to reading the report.
Thank you. Thank you for your time on this. The other members that are here, Buddy Daniels and William Hentosh from Adventist Hospital, everyone has done a tremendous amount of work, and thank you for recognizing that in the committee.
Well, appreciate it. Thank you very much. The next work session item is a discussion of a request from Historic Tacoma for support for the House and Garden Tour. Did you all want to come and talk to us about that?
Thank you. My name is Sabrina Barron. I'm the president of Historic Tacoma. Lorraine Pearsall, who's the vice president, immediate past president, and Eileen Sobek, who joined our board in December and who is about to step up to become an officer and part of our executive committee. So we're very happy to have Eileen involved in these discussions. Thank you for hearing this item so expeditiously, for putting it into the agenda so quickly. Basically, we are preparing the first Sunday in May, which is May 7th this year. We will be holding the 33rd annual House and Garden Tour in Tacoma Park. It's an event with a long history, high profile, brings anywhere from 700 to 1,000 visitors in one afternoon into the community. And this year we're seeking some sponsorship to help us with putting on the tour. And that's why we have come to you with this item this evening. Did you want to say anything?
Yes, I think particularly this year it's a very important year for us. As you all know, we're trying to purchase a building for a public archive space. And any small amount of help is very much appreciated. It's less that we have to spend, and it's a sign of appreciation that is very important to us. And so we thought that you were important to approach as kind of a natural sponsor, because this has so much to do with celebrating the city, and it's known to celebrate the city, and it is, I can't tell you the level of absolutely brutally hard work that goes into putting it on every year. And we wake up in the middle of the night worrying about details. It begins in January for us. And so the sweat equity on our part is phenomenal. And having some small donation to the tour, and we had suggested $2,500, would be so appreciated at this juncture when we are working so hard, not only on this tour, but also to provide that community archive space.
It is a total volunteer effort. We depend on homeowners in the community to participate, and thankfully there's still a premium on participating and some competition to participate. Last year it was very nice. We had 2 neighborhoods that were competing for the tour. That was great. But it is a total volunteer effort, and that is everything. Photographs, the text for the brochure, pounding up signs in the front yards of the houses, day of the tour, providing lemonade and cookies. At the end of the tour, we provide a potluck dinner for the homeowners who've been on the tour, because it's a very full day for them, and so it's very nice for them not to have to cook dinner that evening. And that is completely volunteer as well. That members of our board do that out of their own pocket, out of their own sweat, as Lorraine has said. So it's a complete and total volunteer effort that has been over the years self-funding. But as much sweat equity as goes into it, these things don't happen without a good deal of capital going into them as well. So we have these special reasons. Now our organization is moving to a new level with establishing a physical presence in the community, and so it's very important to us that this event be very successful. I mentioned the numbers of people who come through on the tour, and it's always interesting to us to see where those people come from. And interestingly, the vast majority of those people come from outside the community. They want to come to Tacoma Park They've heard about Tacoma Park. They want to see it. They want to see what the houses are like. They come here to get ideas about their historic districts, about what to do in houses in their community. So it is a very high-profile and recognized event for the community, and we think it's very good, not only for Historic Tacoma, but also for the city as well.
Thank you. The request has come to the council. What's the council's reaction?
Thank you, Mayor Porter. When I think of Tacoma Park and the various groups in Tacoma Park, I mean, it's really the people is what the city is. And I think of the Independence Day celebration that brings a lot of people to town. I think of the Folk Festival that also brings a lot of people into Tacoma Park. And historic Tacoma, I think of it in a different way. I think of it as being, again, a big part of the city. It's an institution in the city. And whereas some of your events aren't as big, the contribution that you make to the city, I think, is just as large as some of those other events that we see. And I don't think we have given, the city has shown much appreciation or given much support to your organization through the years, as we should. And so I would certainly support this.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate you coming with the proposal, and I'm happy to support the proposal. I think that Historic Tacoma is an important resource for our community and provides a great deal to the community, and it's a small thing to ask to give $2,500 to support this event. And I appreciate that the work that Historic Tacoma does in helping us preserve our assets that we have here in the community, which is one of several of the assets that we have that makes this a great city to live in.
Thank you.
First, let me say that when you all contacted me about various ideas for the city, helping Historic Tacoma in providing physical presence in the city and dealing with the city's archives, that I'm very supportive of that, and I could see kind of payment for service as you all described. However, I see this request as a little different from that, because this is essentially a donation of funds for the activity. And what it caused me to think about was, with the examples given in our packet item about the kinds of activities that we provide support to, when we get beyond in-kind support and get to some kind of a direct monetary support, the events tend to be events that are open to the public without charge. And so I think if we went this road, I think that we would need to think about some kind of a understanding, if we wanted to go in this direction, about a criteria that we would use, some kind of general policy for providing donations to organizations for, I guess in this instance I could characterize it as helping the bottom line. And
I'm sorry, I didn't hear
helping the bottom line. And I guess I would like a little bit more sense of how we might think that would impact our ability to say yes, or our ability to say no to any other group that came along with some similar kind of proposal. So I feel like I'm supportive of the direction that you're going in general, and I like the idea of a partnership and something set up in the future. And as I thought about this, I thought, well, if we did do this in this particular instance, looked at kind of just on a hard cash kind of basis, what are we getting? We're getting not for the money. We're getting goodwill. We're helping an organization, but given where we might want to go in the future, maybe we would need to tie it to something else, and if my colleagues wanted to go in this direction, maybe we might want to kind of link to some kind of credit toward some agreement we might have in the future about providing service on city archives, which I think is a good thing to do, with kind of a offset from this donation for the first year's effort or something like that, so we're not just heading into this and saying, here's the money and now let's talk about an agreement for later on and do more.
Actually, where I thought you were going to go, and I do intend to bring it up, is a discussion of a policy that the city wants to provide monies for groups that I think as part of our budget we should have a discussion of a policy on that, but I don't really think that we need to make that decision this evening. As a matter of fact, we don't have time to do it.
No.
But I would like to bring that up as part of the budget discussion. Mark?
Yeah, I think that we've got to have some direction from staff on what else this would apply to, and how broad does this potentially get. On the other hand, I kind of look at it as some of the other stuff we do where we give committees. We've talked about like having the Nuclear Free Zone Committee do advertising and picking up materials for that. And there seems like there are a number of ways where we do things that help groups contribute to the image of the city and promote, the things that we value in the city. And I'm not sure that this is, in that sense, all that much different than some of our other efforts to encourage outreach and awareness of what Tacoma Park is. So then I'm comfortable doing this. I like the long-term solution or suggestion of looking at, what exactly, services can we use and how do we compensate for them. But I do think that after tonight, since we don't have time tonight, we do need to get a view of what else would this apply to. Because I'm sitting here imagining, I don't think of anything, but I'm sure somebody else will come along and say, we're just like that.
Well, if I could respond briefly, one thing that had inspired us was the contribution that the city has been making to Columbia Union College's Taste of Tacoma Festival every year. And you're absolutely right, Bruce. I don't believe admission is charged there, but I believe that there is a lot of stuff for sale there, and that is the point of that event as well. So I think there's a very strong way in which your donation to that event contributes to their bottom line at the end of the day. And I can think of several other examples as well. We bring 700 to 1,000 people into Tacoma Park in the space of 4 hours on a Sunday afternoon. People who shop at the farmers market, people who shop and spend money at local businesses. We have worked with the Business Association beginning last year to ask them to have their businesses, their restaurants stay open later, so that at 5 o'clock when the House and Garden Tour is over, there are opportunities for people to shop and spend money in the community. As Councilmember Elrich just expressed, it's important to invest in the community, and it's important to invest in the entire community, I think, here. These are the kinds of things, maybe I should recuse myself in this instance, but these are the kinds of things that I, as a taxpayer, really appreciate seeing the city support.
But it is the case, though, that we no longer support the Taste of Tacoma. We have not this year, and I think we did for the first 4 years of its existence, but we didn't this year.
I actually do think you should support your organizations to some degree. Coming forward and asking you for $2,500 in this instance does not seem to me to be a large sum of money. We are a 27-year organization in the city. We are a 501c3. I don't know how many other organizations you have that have quite those qualifications, but I think that you should think about how you can help organizations in the city. And I'm not just saying, fly-by-night things that come together, but I'm sure there are many that you should really develop some kind of a policy down the road, I think, for some small amount of help. And please do not tie this to the discussion on the archives for fiscal year 07. I think that, this is really quite a different thing, Bruce. And we welcome the opportunity to have that discussion with you on the archives.
Okay, we're running behind schedule. Let me give Councilmember Berry and then Councilmember Rossman.
Yes, I support the $2,500 with one stipulation, and that would be that a leave behind be prepared, maybe with the help of the city. It wouldn't have to be very elaborate. That would basically describe some of the other events that Tacoma Park would be having throughout the year, so that people from outside who would come would know that. The second, it's not a condition, but I strongly suggest that you do it, would be an attempt to create a list of the people who attend, try to get some emails. And what we would do with that then is we would provide it to the rec department and to other departments within the city who, on occasionally, on an occasional basis, on an opt-in basis, could send these folks a message giving them some information on an upcoming event or programs that we might have. And then thirdly, again, certainly not a contingent on my support, would be a suggestion that there be a little slideshow put together afterwards with some photographs of the houses. Maybe this is done already, or parts of the homes, and if there's a particular theme of gardens or bathrooms, my wife does it really, and she loves it. And if that could be made into a little slideshow, certainly I could help with that, and that could be on the website afterwards, which would give people who didn't have the opportunity to come a chance to see what it was like, and those that did come might appreciate having a memento with some photographs that could remind them of the fabulous bathroom that they would like to get their wife to build for them.
Those are all great ideas, and those are all things that we would be more than delighted to work with doing. The theme this year is the art of living, and I think your wife is going to see some pretty spectacular kitchens this year, so be prepared.
I love kitchens. We were speculating the other day whether there is a correlation between the size of a kitchen and the size of people who live or have a kitchen. So that would be an interesting thing to do a little study on. But yeah, that would be fabulous, and therefore, something to show afterwards that would focus on the kitchen. And then, of course, if restaurants wanted to give discounts or something, or have little chits available, that might further stimulate the purchase, which we're always interested in doing, of course, of locally made goods from local businesses.
Well, I was interested to hear what my council colleagues had to say on this request before I weighed in. My opinion is the House and Garden Tour is one of the most excellent ways that we highlight our community and the terrific housing that we have here, the creative people we have here, the economic development opportunities that are here. And one thing I wanted to find out from the city manager is the extent of our support for Taste of Tacoma, which when they first came to us, was a new idea. It wasn't something established and with 30 years of history on its side. But I believe we supported them for 4 years at, is it 5,000, 3,000?
Yeah, I can only speak to last year since that was the first year that I was here and the request was made. My understanding was that the city had provided somewhere in the neighborhood of $5,000 in funding. Last year that was reduced to, I believe, $2,500, and then based on the council's discussion last year, it was we made no contribution this year of any cash contribution. Certainly there was some logistical support from the various city departments.
Okay. The other festival I remember happening during my council tenure was the Tacoma Arts and Healing Day, I believe it was called, and Paul McClarty was the one who approached us about that, and they also received a financial contribution.
I don't remember that they did. I don't think so.
I would like to see us wholeheartedly support the House and Garden Tour, and I would be more inclined to support it at the higher level, though if $2,500 is what people feel they're comfortable with, then I support that. I also would like to find out if cable coverage is given to the House and Garden Tour. That's already done, and if not, if that could be something that we make sure we highlight.
I don't know if we do it on a regular basis, but I do remember, and I believe it was last year, there was a very nice program done that showed some of the houses' interiors and exteriors with sort of a soundtrack behind it that was very nicely done.
Okay. And then lastly, I think that some of the public works assistance that we provide to other festivals would be appropriate here. Maybe helping hammer in the signs in front of the homes that are on the tour, breaking down the signage at the end of the event. All of that is an important contribution that we make to, of in-kind services that we make to our other festivals. I don't think it's unusual that people who are doing something that contributes so directly to our community would ask for financial support. I think that the House and Garden Tour has done it without our financial support for a very long time, and I would affirm the other council members' feelings that this is an appropriate request, and I would like to support it too.
Well, since we're running a little bit behind time, all I will say is that I agree with my colleagues in terms of the benefit that Historic Tacoma and the House and Garden Tour have been for the city. And as I'm counting it, at least, I'm getting a yes from pretty much everyone on the council for a contribution of $2,500. So I think that's where we are. And I think that we should definitely talk about the bigger issue as part of our discussion of the budget, because I think that that is something that we probably are going to have to deal with at some point in the future. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to take a very short break, and it's going to be shorter than normal because we're running behind schedule. And as I noted earlier, we're going to have to get out of here very close to on time. All right, we are moving on to the next item, which is a continued discussion of rent stabilization. This is one in a series of discussions the City Council has been having on this topic, and the goal for this evening is to have the staff present to us their recommendations based on the council's discussion thus far. The council is not being asked to make decisions. They're going to present them to us. The council is going to have a week to mull them over, and then we see where we proceed from there. So we're not being asked to make a decision this evening. It's simply a presentation.
Thank you.
Okay.
What we're hoping to do this evening is to give you some broad concepts. There are no specifics tied to any of these suggestions regarding possible revisions to the ordinance. Our intent is, after we get feedback from you, that we would go back and work out the details. I'd also like to qualify our comments or recommendations on that, that there may be tweaking between them as we fine-tune the language for these various recommendations and the recommendations that the council supports. Because it's an evolving process, and as we go through and further refine things, it may change a little bit, but not substantially. When we went through and prepared the matrix, our primary goals were very similar to those of the council, in that our intent was to preserve and maintain the affordable housing stock, as well as provide housing options for the community's low and moderate income individuals. And as we go through this, you'll see that those are the overriding objectives in our recommendations. We are also looking at ways of providing a fair return to the landlords in an effort to balance the needs of the tenants as well as the needs of the landlords. And I think that that's something that has come across in all the discussions that we've had with the council the past 2 years. So with that, I'd like to go to the matrix that's been attached. And we've broken it out into 3 categories. The first are what the current ordinance requirements are. The middle column are comments that we received from the council at our last work session discussion on April 3rd. And the final, or third column, are staff recommendations in terms of possible revisions that we'd like you to consider. Starting at the beginning, units that are subject to rent stabilization. Right now, the current ordinance applies to all rental units with 3 or 4 exceptions. Whenever a landlord owns more than one rental unit, be a single family or a condominium or a multifamily unit, if you own just a single rental unit, that's exempt from rent stabilization. And then there are others that are broken out here. The one that I have omitted are property-based Section 8 housing units, such as the Franklin and Tacoma Towers. There were no comments offered at the April 3rd work session by the council. From staff's recommendation, we have listed 6 possible exceptions that we'd like to recommend. Again, that all units be subject to rent stabilization. And then we focused our exemptions on properties or ownership situations that provide affordable housing to income-qualified individuals. So the first one are units receiving operating expenditure mortgage subsidies from other governmental entities. And that would include Victory Towers and the Franklin Apartments. Right now, that would have an impact of about 425 units. The second bullet are rental units that are owned by recognized nonprofit housing organizations such as MHP or CPDC, which we spoke about earlier this evening, that have a specific income group targeted and are subject to agreements regarding rent limits. Going through, Jean pulled together a list for me as far as what properties that would apply to right now, and that would include about 475 units that would be exempt based on the current ownership conditions that we have today in Tacoma Park. The third bullet would be units that are owned or leased by a nonprofit organization that provides some sort of treatment or programming for a targeted population, be it for substance abuse or other health or medical issues. Newly constructed housing in Tacoma Park, but for a limited time period. This would apply to, for example, the ICG development proposed in Westmoreland and Carroll Avenue. If this were approved by the council, those 70-plus housing units, assuming they were all rental, would be exempt for a 5-year period. Then we have units leased to tenants under rental subsidy programs, either offered by the county or the state or the federal government. Examples would be the Section 8 voucher program, transitional housing programs, self-sufficiency programs, et cetera. Right now that we have roughly 150 Section 8 vouchers that are leased in Tacoma Park. And then again, any owner-occupied group house. And I have no numbers for that. They're currently exempt from our ordinance.
I have a quick question. It looks like Mark said. In terms of your listing, did you mean to exclude the current exclusions, and do you mean to not include any one rental unit, the landlord who owns only one rental unit, or accessory apartments?
We were looking at the housing that was provided, so this would not include properties that, or it would not include units where the landlord owned just one. So that would mean owner-occupied accessory apartments as well as single-family homes.
So, but I mean, you were intending to leave those exclusions that are in the current law, or you're okay. So you were meaning not to include them.
So
Okay,
essentially,
gotcha.
what our
That was just
recommendations
a question.
are doing are adding roughly 215 units to the mix. So 215 single-family homes, condominiums, or accessory apartments that are currently not subject to rent stabilization would be subject.
Okay, all right.
And that we would be omitting from the rent stabilization is those properties that are focused on providing affordable housing to income-qualified individuals.
Okay.
So it's a trade-off.
Okay, Mark.
For clarity on that question, since I am an owner of a rental unit,
Right? This would
it's
have
not
an impact on him.
owner-occupied, this is putting me in the mix.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
From my personal perspective, it's not really how many units an individual owns, it's what type of housing is provided. And that was at least my motivation for arguing for this, for exempting, or for including landlords such as yourself in the mix. What it would do if this was approved by the City Council is it would give you an opportunity to establish your base rent, and then from subsequent years you would be then subject to rent stabilization. Just like the owner of a 4-unit apartment building in Tacoma Park or a 150-unit apartment.
Thank you.
A couple of things. One is I'm a little unsure. I mean, we had discussion when we did this about the owner-occupied accessories, and there was a lot of discussion about what a homeowner might have to spend on their house, and the inability then to recover any of it off the rental unit. I know when the council decided this before, they thought that was particularly onerous to people who had accessories. So I'm wondering whether the thinking has changed on that.
Again, the argument for including these on is that those particular, or that particular financial situation isn't really significantly different from that of someone who's just bought a 4-unit apartment complex. They still have the same, on different scales admittedly, operating costs as far as mortgage or utilities, property taxes, et cetera. The one advantage to landlords such as Councilmember Stevens is that they can establish the base rent now so that they make an educated decision regarding what they need to maintain that cash flow that they've historically enjoyed or that they know they'll need to cover their operating expenses associated with that particular property.
My other question is about the units leased to tenants under county, state, or federal rent subsidy programs. I know that the federal program, the Section 8 voucher, ties it strictly to a tenant paying a portion of their income. And I understand that. County programs, I don't think do that. And
there are a variety of different, excuse me for a minute.
Yeah, so my concern is as long as the rent paid is limited, or the portion of the rent paid by the tenant in the Section 8 program is limited, this makes some sense. It doesn't make as much sense if we're talking about a tenant going and getting a $150 subsidy, toward their rent, and then because they're getting some kind of assistance, having to think about on the rent control, and the rent increase could be much more than $150, much more than the assistance they're getting. So just having a blanket for all county programs as opposed to programs like the Section 8, I think we ought to be careful which ones we extend it to.
And that would be one of the details or the specifics that would have to be worked out as we go through and refine the language. The intent with this particular bullet point was to focus on programs where individuals paid a certain percentage of their income towards their rent.
So
We just didn't list all the programs out.
So at some point you can come back to us with a list of the county programs, what they apply to, what their parameters are.
We can do that.
And I think it would be helpful for us to talk about what we're going to include
Yeah.
and not include in this.
Another detail that I would add to that is thinking about what happens if a unit is leased to somebody who's got a subsidy, income-based subsidy, and then what happens when that tenant is no longer in that unit.
If you recall from some of the jurisdictions that we talked about, under some of these scenarios, they have to reapply on an annual basis to get that exemption. So say, for example, we were to include as a property that would be exempt from rent stabilization those receiving Section 8 vouchers, they would have to apply on an annual basis to verify that that was still the situation.
And if they were no longer, then they basically go back to their old ceiling.
Right.
So you would treat this as an exception rather than we did it before.
Gotcha.
That's good.
Quick clarification on any one rental unit. Can you tell me whether the existing law, I'll put it this way, I think this would change the circumstances for somebody, I'll take for instance me, who lives in my own house, own it, and let's say I go on a sabbatical and I'm out of the country for 3 years and I rent my house. My sense is that currently that situation, somebody would have to have the house meet inspection standards from the county.
That would be regardless of whether or not you were under...
Right, and currently would not fall under rent control. And if we change to rent control under the staff suggestion, that house would be under rent control.
Correct. Any licensed rental facility would be subject to rent stabilization unless they fell within the parameters of the exemption.
One other question?
Yes.
The other item that
Council
doesn't
be
appear to be,
mindful of the time.
that's in column 1 that doesn't appear to be in column 3 is establishments with primary person diagnosis, cure, mitigation, and treatment of illness. Is that...
Actually, it's just phrased differently.
I think it's
bullet point 3
Yeah,
in the
bullet
third
point
column.
All right, that seemed to target specific things, different things than this, and it's similar, but it seems to target different use of the units.
I assume that both of them would cover, for example, a nursing home, right?
Nursing homes are not subject to rent stabilization or licensing.
Right.
This is only applied to licensed rental facilities.
Like a halfway type.
Like a program for substance abuse, and there's a residential component of that particular treatment. That would not be subject to rent stabilization, even though they might, for some other reason, be considered a licensed rental facility.
Okay. All right, good.
But it would not apply to nursing homes,
Okay.
things like that.
Good.
On the second page, there are no other comments. For the annual rent increase allowance, currently it's 70% of the CPI. There were no comments offered at the April 3rd meeting. We're looking at the possibility of increasing that to 100% of the CPI, which is less than the housing component of that particular index. If you recall, right now it's 2.1. If the county uses just the housing component of the CPI, and that's 4.4. We're also proposing that if surcharges are considered as part of the recodification, that they not be considered in the base, so that you didn't get a percent increase on top of the surcharge. You'd get it just based on the base rent.
Okay, but you're thinking about this in conjunction with the thing on the third page, which is the surcharges, right?
next item are capital improvement or rent increase petitions. And as we noted in past discussion, there are two opportunities now for capital improvements, either a regular or a security-related improvement. At the April 3rd work session, the council was interested in limiting expenditures to major long-term improvements or actual capital improvements close to what the IRS defines as a capital improvement, and not some of the more repair associated or implied expenditures that are currently permitted under this type of a rent increase petition. And there were no comments regarding the security-related improvements. We spoke about that for some time amongst ourselves and thought that one option might be just to have a single rent increase petition application and process that would take into consideration the costs associated with any capital improvements and the operating expenses that are currently covered under the hardship rent increase petition. That it may streamline things a little bit, plus address some of the concerns regarding increased utility costs, the amortization for capital improvements that are currently included in the ordinance and in the regulations, and then also address some of the concerns regarding the difficulty of preparing a hardship rent increase petition, or the arguments that have been presented by landlords. If this is something that you'd like us to pursue, that there are some other issues that would need to be addressed in terms of the frequency of the submissions, what the increase would be per year, and if it would include or exclude other increases, be it the surcharges or the annual rent increase allowance. There is also additional research would need to be done in terms of what is a reasonable rate of return, and this goes back into the discussion about what's fair, a fair return for the landlord. But this is an option that we're thinking that would address some of the concerns regarding the challenges of applying for rent increase petitions, as well as some of the concerns that were raised by the council regarding what actually is a capital improvement. Along those same lines, as far as the economic hardship, one of the suggestions that was made in the April discussion was to eliminate the suggested base year and just to allow the landlord to establish an optimal year for their petition. If we were to do the consolidated rent increase petition, the economic hardship rent increase petition would not exist. It would take on this new hybrid form. Something that's currently not considered under the annual or under the current ordinance are the surcharges. And the council is supportive of doing an energy surcharge, as are we. There are different ways of doing that, and again, it would involve more research, but in terms of many communities base it on actual utility or energy costs that are prorated on a square footage basis, excluding common areas, et cetera. One of the things we're thinking we might be able to do is to establish a flat surcharge based on indices that are established by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for some of their affordable housing programs. Yes?
I'd like to make a pitch for not using indices, but for looking at, for example, we know HEPCO has to announce that there's going to be a rate increase. So I agree we need a formula based on who pays the utilities and the type of building it is. But I'd like to see the formula applied to what we know the rate increases are going to be, rather than the indices, because the indices lag. And if somebody gets hit with a 38% increase in July, that's going to work. That's not going to show up fully impacting a person until 12 months later. Right. So there's a significant lag in the time that gets applied. And I think the point of this was to deal with what was probably the most egregious, the sudden impact, and no ability to deal with the sudden impact. And this is the place I think it makes most sense to come up with a formula or a process that deals with how do you address, HEPCO saying it's going up 38%. This is one thing I think would do better to be forward-thinking rather than using indices and looking backwards.
Right. And we've talked about that. The biggest challenge we have is that 1 year varies from utility consumption to the next so dramatically. But we will look and see what our options might be on that.
Sure. Yeah. You might find out how HUD does their calculations as well to see they consider any of that kind of, because I know they're different by
They
region.
actually do. They look at historical utility consumptions and then apply the current rates or the proposed rates to those past utility usage numbers. The thing that I like about the utility allowances that HUD has established is that they vary depending upon the type of housing, recognizing that a single-family home might be more challenging to heat than an apartment in a high-rise, and that it also takes into consideration the different sizes of the units. So there's some
as well as,
fluctuation and the type of
as well
energy.
as what they're using to heat or to cook with.
Correct.
So it's a pretty refined tool and would certainly save all kinds of administrative burden on the staff to have to cope with that every year.
And if you had that to sort of set what the base energy cost was, then you could apply a forward percentage increase because you would know the percentage increase in advance.
It would actually even be simpler than that because HOC has to, all of the housing authorities, for example, are mandated by HUD to go through and do this on an annual basis. And that's one of the mechanisms that they have to do is they have to contact the utility companies to find out what anticipated surge or utility rates are going to be. From the selfish standpoint, I'm looking at it as they get to do all the hard work and we get to
I didn't realize that they actually did.
They do that, yes.
I'm all for anything that makes things simpler, yeah.
Yeah, and just on past professional experience, the numbers are actually pretty close. I used to have to do it for the public housing programs and for the Section 8 programs in Minnesota, and the numbers are fairly close to what the actual landlords have experienced. We were also looking at the possibility of doing a property tax surcharge, recognizing that that is something that has been a significant burden on property owners, regardless of whether or not they're renting or not, and that there's a possibility of doing that. Again, the frequency or if there's a formula that we could use for that would be something that we would investigate further if this is an option that you'd like us to pursue. The other area that there has been a lot of discussion on are rent increases upon vacancy. Right now, if a rental unit is voluntarily vacated or the tenant is asked to vacate for a breach of the lease, the landlord can increase the rent to the maximum allowable. Any rent increases that they've sort of stored or delayed implementing, recognizing that they have a landlord or a tenant that's a very good tenant and they want to keep them in place. Two of the options that were discussed at the April 3rd meeting was to increase it to the maximum allowable or to increase it to that of a comparable unit within the same rental facility. We've spoken with legal staff about that, and there are some concerns regarding defining what a comparable unit is, particularly within smaller rental facilities where there may not be a unit that is comparable in terms of the amenities or the size. One two-bedroom is not going to be exactly the same as another two-bedroom, particularly for the smaller units. And again, in the larger units, too, where you have different views, you have different layouts, things like that. So legal staff is not necessarily recommending that we do that. One of the options that we've got is that there is maybe a possibility of, again, using information that has been developed by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, are their fair market rents, their FMRs. And basically what that is a detailed analysis of the rents in this particular area based on census data, telephone surveys, and other information that the government collects, and factoring in or excluding substandard rental facilities, properties that have recently come online, properties that are already receiving subsidies where the rents may be too high or too low because of the support that they're receiving from the government. And then the fair market rent is established in the 40th percentile. So basically 40% of the rents in the area fall within that limit. One option we've got is that a landlord could take the maximum allowable for that particular unit or use it as tied to the fair market rents that have been established by HUD for the area. And those, again, are done on an annual basis and are published for Montgomery County.
I guess I'm having a little problem with the logic here. If you're worried about raising the rent from one unit to another because the units aren't comparable, I mean, the fair market rents are just an average. They're not comparable to anything. And so why would you go to fair market rent, which has even less comparability? I mean, if it's a small building and none of the units are the same as another unit, then you stick with option one. I mean, I guess I don't understand. If you're worried about comparing one unit to another because they're not comparable, but you want to compare it to a fair market rent, which is completely not comparable, I'm not understanding the logic there.
It's basic, the logic is, I agree with what you're saying. It's a standard that's equitably applied across the board, and that it's clearly defined in terms of what that income, or what that rent value is for properties within this particular region based on the size of the particular unit.
I understand that, but if you're worried about comparability, this is going to aggravate it because somebody will say, wait a minute, that guy's got fair market rent for his little weensy two-bedroom that has nothing in it, and I've got this beautiful views, and I've got air conditioning. Well, I guess air conditioning is going to fit in fair market. But I mean, it's got beautiful views, it's got all this new kitchen stuff, and yet I get the same rent he does. I mean, you're going to just aggravate totally all this comparability stuff if you do that.
None of this is going to be, yes, and that's a challenge that we're going to be facing with a lot of the regulations or the revisions that we're proposing, that it's not going to be a perfect fit for everyone. But it is a standard, or it is sort of a means of measuring or establishing a ceiling.
The problem with the comparable unit strategy is that it's subject to manipulation and disagreement, and it's very hard to administer. And this was before my time, and we still had this, but from speaking with the other attorneys in the office, that was something that they did a lot of legal wrangling about, and even some litigation. A circuit court judge had actually said that rule was unconstitutionally vague. I don't think that decision is binding on us, and we couldn't work around that. But I think as a practical matter, it's difficult to administer. And from my research, that problem seems to play out wherever municipalities have tried to implement that system.
I guess I'd like you to spend some time exploring that still, because there's some equity within the building in terms of where the rents are. I mean, if you go to fair market rents in a hyperactive market, like the market we're in now, you're going to wind up, I think, with substantially higher rents than we have. And you haven't presented anything here, so I can look at this and say, well, the 40th percentile of fair market is really not Montgomery County's average thing. It's less than that. So I don't know whether I can say I'm comfortable with this number.
We can give you the information, and it is substantially less than the average. Again, it's the 40th percentile, and it's the gross rent. So if a tenant, for example, is not paying any utilities, then it would even be lower than what the fair market rent is.
Well, if you're looking for options, I guess I'd like to just actually really see the numbers and how this plays out. But I guess my other concern was that I've been in a lot of the 6-unit buildings, and I'm puzzled as to what the comparability issue is. I mean, most of those things are laid out on absolutely identical floor plans, and the halls are split down the middle, and they've got kitchens, the same number of bedrooms. They look the same to me, and most of the high rises you go in, and there's a set floor plan, and people didn't go in and build 10 different units that are really that different on a floor. I mean, maybe if somebody could say that in Tacoma Park, being on the second floor of a 6-unit building facing the back results in a higher rent than being on the first floor facing the street, and you can show me that data's real, and it might be interesting. But I suspect that if you go on Roanoke Avenue, they're not saying, well, you're up on the second floor, you got a view, and people on the first floor don't have a view, so we're charging you more. I would be surprised.
We can get you that information.
Okay.
Just as an aside, though, to expand a little bit on what Ken was talking about in terms of some past precedents, I'm going through and reading this thing that Ken had tracked down in terms of things to take into consideration when you're writing an ordinance regarding rent stabilization or rent control. And the more specific and you can be in terms of the legislation and the fewer opportunities you provide to manipulate, for lack of a better word, the situation, be it owner-occupied or not owner-occupied, things like that, the more supportable your ordinance becomes.
I will reinforce that because I was on the council when the case you're referring to came up. And the council did change the law in the time before the opinion actually would have gone into effect. And we were very aware of the changes we made to the law at that time because we knew what parameters the judge had set down and said the law, what test the law had to meet. I don't want to go back there again.
Well, we would prefer not to go to court on any of these things, right? And then last but not least, just for miscellaneous provisions, the current ordinance limits rent increases to one per 12-month period, and we would propose maintaining that, but looking at the possibility of establishing a maximum rent increase based on all of the different scenarios that we have, be it a maximum rent increase for rents upon vacancy, to the consolidated rent increase petition, to the surcharges, etc.
Can I ask you to look at one more thing? It's come up in discussions with some of the nonprofits in Montgomery County, and it's a concern they have that if they take a building that's going to undergo substantial renovation in the hands of a nonprofit, say MHP, and it's got vacant units in it, and they're placed with the dilemma where if they put a tenant in the unit now and then undertake very substantial improvements, they're limited to 15% as the maximum increase that an existing tenant can get per unit or something like that. Whereas if they'd left the unit empty until the renovations were done, say 6 months or a year, then Holton might distribute the rent increases differently, and that unit might see higher than 15% if the unit was kept vacant. And they've said this is counterproductive for them because they're faced with weighing, do we take in a tenant who's then limited to 15% increase, or do we try to leave the unit vacant for a year and lose 6 months or a year's worth of income, which doesn't work for them, obviously. So I would like to see if we could explore language that affects nonprofits, that if they have vacant units and they're intending on doing repairs, that they can bring in the tenant and knowingly phase it in, the way we talked about doing. We allow prospective rent increases where somebody can come in before they bought a building and say, if I do X, Y, and Z, is this the rent I can get? Or what is the rent I can get? Try to do something that allows them a little bit of flexibility on tenants coming in.
I think that would be easy to do because we now have, you can put a rent escalation clause in your lease for both just annual increase and for capital improvement increases. And we could do that without a cap, 15% cap applying to the...
But you're talking about taking the increase before the improvements are necessarily completed.
Before they're completed. Yeah, or at least the tenant knowing that they're going to, that when the improvements are completed, the rent's going to go there. So somebody might come in and get a bargain now, but when the unit's done, they know they're coming in willingly.
Right. I mean, we can investigate that. We've chatted about it internally and have some concerns regarding how we might be able to administer that. But if you were to proceed with some of the exemptions that we've proposed, that wouldn't apply to, it would be a moot point because they would not be subject to rent stabilization.
Okay. If I can just go back for 1 second, I don't want to prolong our discussion, so I'll just ask you this, and maybe you can give us a response, unless it's real simple with one yes or no. Looking back at the section on capital improvements and in the existing law where it says upgrades or the provision of additional amenities are not permitted, and I came up with a couple of examples of things that I think would fall in that category that are not permitted, and I want to make sure that I'm right. And those are more electrical plugs, microwaves or dishwashers, handicap accessibility items like wider doors, laundry facilities, common rooms, and yard or playground.
Correct. None of those would qualify.
For capital improvements?
For capital improvement. If they do not exist, they would not qualify for capital.
If you put them in, you pay for them, but you don't get any rent increase to cover.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Is next week the last time we're going to discuss this, when I'm going to be out at APA?
No, it will not be the last time we're going to discuss this. I think you can.
Then I will hold my comments in favor of timeliness.
Okay. You would be welcome if you had something you wanted to share with the council to send it to us or write it down or whatever. Okay. Any other questions, clarifications, wonder about the logic? Okay.
Oh, don't go there.
Don't open this up.
All right. We're going to move on to the next item.
If something comes up, email me and we'll get to it.
All right. And yes. We're going to talk about the final item on the agenda, which is an update on the community legacy funding issue.
In 2003, the city received a $300,000 award from the state of Maryland for a proposed multi-story parking facility in the Old Town area. This is a property that Mr. John Urciolo owns. In the meantime, or since that award was originally made, there have been changes in the project and in the construction industry as a whole that have resulted in the delay of the multi-level parking structure. And speaking with Mr. Urciolo, he's looking at delaying that for an undefined period of time and scaling back his commercial infill development and not building a parking garage at this point in time. We have some constraints, or the state has some expectations regarding us spending this money down. And part of the agreement is that this loan would be, the project would be completed this spring and the loan would start being repaid. It's not going to happen this spring. And I'm asking the council in terms of how you'd like to proceed with the award. Basically, it's a $300,000 loan, 0% interest and repaid over a period of 10 years. Originally proposed repayment was from the revenue stream generated by the parking facility. Because of delays in getting the required approvals from Montgomery County, plus tremendous increases in construction material costs, it's no longer financially feasible for Mr. Urciolo to go ahead and build the parking structure. Again, he wants to go ahead and do his infill commercial development, only scale it back a little bit so that he could still accommodate some development on that lot and in the future. I've spoken to the state, and they would like some input in terms of how the council wants to proceed with this. Do you want to identify another project that would provide for redevelopment in that immediate area, or we could restructure the project and serve as a secondary lender to Mr. Urciolo, loan the money, which to him, he would repay it to us, we in turn would repay it to the state. And that money could be used to make improvements to the existing surface lot, which are required, offset some of the construction costs with that particular infill development, or identify another project within the immediate area, recognizing that it's a loan, it's not a grant. Or we could turn the money back to the state. We have some options. In the interest of time, I won't go into a lot of detail about those, but...
Can I say two things?
Go ahead.
Just one is, I definitely don't want us to head in the direction of turning it back to the state. I think the state needs to hear from us loud and clear that we need that to remain in our column. The second thing I wanted to find out about, and I know we don't have much time, but your blue sheet talked about the funds being used to do streetscape improvements along Carroll Avenue. I was understanding that the state, isn't that state money supposed to be forthcoming to complete Carroll Avenue?
We have submitted a application to the state through the Community Legacy Program for grant funds to finish up the Carroll Avenue streetscape project for the commercial section, with the bulk of the funding being in that intersection of Westmoreland and Carroll Avenue, where there's some really serious safety considerations that need to be addressed. For a variety of reasons, they have not made any announcements or any decisions regarding the community legacy applications for this coming year. So that's already in the pipeline, along with another project that would offset some of the acquisition costs associated with tenant-initiated purchases. We could petition the state to have this $300,000 redirected to that project, but it would be a loan and not a grant as we've originally proposed, or the application that's in the pipeline now. They have given us some latitude in terms of restructuring the funding as far as redefining the project, but not the financing mechanism. So we could spend it on the Carroll Avenue Streetscape project, but it would be a loan, it would not be a grant, and the city would have to repay it.
That doesn't seem like a great idea to me. Yeah, there were two things I was interested in this from the beginning. One is that this was not going to end up costing the city anything. We were going to spend the money, and it was going to be repaid out of revenues from the parking garage.
Correct.
So that it wasn't a new debt we were taking on in terms of the debt service having to be paid out of city funds. It was going to be paid by the project, and that was one thing that I and I know other council members were very concerned about, that the revenues from the project did pay for it. The other reason that I was very interested in this is I know that Old Town is really very much in need of parking. And I would like to see options that would provide additional parking space for generally for Old Town, not necessarily for one project, but generally for Old Town, and that could be repaid out of the revenues from the use of those parking spaces. That's what I would be most interested in.
I second that.
As would we, there are some challenges from a zoning perspective, and we can pull together all that information and give you more detail about why that might be challenging to do right now. Essentially, one option would be to see about leasing, working out with one of the property owners in the area, a lease or option to purchase property and establish a surface parking lot. I mean, we've got some options. Not a lot of options, but we can look at them.
What other council members thought?
On the, in the spirit of free flow. I had some experience recently with a community that put parking underneath of a park and put ball fields on top of it. And I was wondering if, I think that the park that's there is owned by the county, that's right there across from where the new place is. And I was looking at it, and I wonder what kind of cost would be incurred in putting in parking underneath that park area there.
Which park?
Where the gazebo's at.
Oh,
under the gazebo, under the hill under the gazebo.
I don't know the answer to
A
that.
lot.
Yeah.
I mean, the only time that we looked at underground parking was in connection with putting parking under the property that we own next to the fire station, and I remember the numbers were quite high.
I can get you a per unit ballpark, per space ballpark figure for that.
Because it's on a slope already, you could have 2 levels and step it down and not have to have
ramps.
You wouldn't have to have ramps internally, because you could just go in on one level or the other level, and you could step it down and put the park basically back on top of it. So it's just an idea.
No, it's an interesting idea, and I've heard that out there.
Huh?
One of the challenges that I can think of just off the top of my head is that there's some timing issues with the Community Legacy Award, and that given that the fact that the property is owned by Park and Planning, and it may involve a lengthy discussion, it might not be something we can do within that time frame. But I will see what we can pull together as far as costs.
I've just thrown it out there.
Okay, good ideas. Good to throw ideas out. We'll just see what happens to them. Any other thoughts that the council has?
I just throw my support behind the idea of parking generation that pays for itself with fees. I don't like the idea of a loan to a particular owner of property for the purpose of developing their property. But if there's a parking scenario either there or on another lot, that would be helpful, that would be worth exploring.
I'll see what we can formalize. One of the arguments for doing this as far as a pass-through loan is that it would create some additional redevelopment in that area. Right now, the property is basically the deck, which is basically not generating any property tax revenues, not generating any energy in that area in terms of trips or retail opportunities. And as he proceeds with this project, it would end up resulting in a restaurant and additional retail space. So there would be some indirect benefits to the community as a whole, as well as to the city council and the city in terms of the additional property tax revenues that it would generate.
Well, I mean, that has a merit to it, and we've served as pass-through to other loans, and it wasn't a happy experience.
Yes, microphone.
Well, I would suggest that if you've got paid parking in one area and you've still got free parking in somebody else's lot across the street, you're going to have a hard time making money on your parking lot.
Right.
I don't think we have free parking anywhere down there.
There's other open, unmetered parking.
Well, private.
Depends how it feels. There's one lot that obviously we all know, which is frequently used by many, many people. But there are two lots. But one, the Kirschner lot is used by lots and lots of people for big parking.
Only on weekends, though.
Yeah, during the week.
Yeah.
Except every time I park there, he sees me.
Yeah, no, I mean, he has an office in that building, and he watches who parks in his lot.
He does. He's very good at that.
To me, it's as worthwhile to approach him about, would he be interested in metering the lot? Would he be interested in something where, for example, on Saturdays, that lot becomes unusable for large portions of the day because people parking who aren't doing business and all down there for, at the church services. But many of the merchants are upset because the space is available, none of the customers can come in there. Well, if it were metered, or somehow regulated in that fashion, then it would be useful to the Old Town businesses on Saturday, which is a good day for them to do business, and that might be a good thing, and he might be interested. I just think that there's more than one property owner who we could approach about making the contribution to solving our parking problem in downtown.
I think it's worth following up on, and I know we're running a little bit behind, so I think maybe the goal for this discussion should be just to throw out any additional ideas, and we'll come back and continue it at a later date. Anything else in terms of council direction or ideas?
Not additional, just support for parking.
Okay. Parking seems to have a lot of support, including by merchants in Old Town. All right. I appreciate the council's forbearance, and I appreciate the people who come before us. And we're only running 10 minutes behind schedule, which is probably a new record.
Yes,
Nothing else, we're adjourned.
closes on everywhere.
There's no reception.